So without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Varda Mehrotra, is an animal advocate and a movement builder who is exploring intersectional solutions. She is the founder of Samayu India, which undertakes intersectional work and applies a systems approach to issues surrounding justice in animals. Under her decade-long leadership, FIAPO, India's Federation for Animal Organizations, was recognized as one of the most effective animal charities. She has spearheaded several large-scale undercover investigations, campaigns for farmed animals, and was the architect of India's largest plant-based advocacy network called Living Free, which has created many animal advocate leaders in the country. Today's workshop is called Building Resilient Movements, the Importance of Strategic Planning and Leadership. In order to sustain and grow the animal justice movement in Asia, we need a strong foundation. Learn how to better strategize your advocacy work and take leadership in your field to build a more result-oriented movement. This workshop offers knowledge about strategizing in leadership and discusses some challenges associated with them from an intersectional lens. So without further ado, please welcome Varda.
Thank you so much, and really excited to be here, really excited to be sharing some of the learnings that I've had over the years on strategic campaigning, and also to sort of really continue to evolve my own approach through discussions today, and through the work that I continue to do. I'm going to share my slides. Can I do that? Hang on. Hopefully that's visible to everybody. Is that so strategic campaigning and leadership? Why do we? I mean, this is sort of this almost does not need discussion, but why do we really need strategic campaigning and leadership? And to point out what's obvious, we have such few resources and we have overwhelming odds, and that's why it's all the more important for us to be super strategic and to be able to leverage the few resources that we have. If we talk about just farmed animals, there are billions of animals that are exploited for food and other forms of exploitation, and the resources we have are absolutely minuscule. They're so even within the larger civil society, in the larger social justice movements, animal advocacy is one of the most under-resourced movement. We're a minority pressure group. So for us to be able to really create any change against the overwhelming odds that we have, we don't have a choice not to be strategic, because it's really such a David versus Goliath situation, so it becomes so essential for us to continuously be thinking strategically, and it's not like an activity that we do once every 5 years or every 3 years. If we create a strategy, a strategic plan for 3 years, and then that's it done. Strategic thinking applies to the most to the most basic, regular, everyday work level, to macro, big picture thinking. It's something that we've got to constantly keep doing, and we've got to constantly keep doing it because of the situation that because of the situation that we're in with the with the resources and the time crunch that we have, and with what we are really faced with. So I actually want to start with an exercise. What comes to your mind, if you can just take 5 minutes right now, what comes to your mind when you think of a strategic leader? If you could write down names of 3 leaders who inspire you, and they could be at any point in time, in history, names of 3 leaders who inspire you, and why. So we can just take 5 minutes if everybody has a piece of paper and pen, or your laptop. I can't actually see people, but or the chat box. I'm not sure because I'm sharing my screen. Can somebody let me know once there's a message with most people saying that they've done the exercise? So after that, it'll be good to have a discussion on what comes up for us as we think of strategic and inspiring leaders and what leadership means. We'll just take 5 minutes now to do this. Shared on why they're inspiring leaders.
Yeah, of course. So the first person that came to mind was Ellie, our director of AAA, and she has a very long-term vision of our organizations, and she looks at things from different perspectives, not just like our financial stability, but also like our staff or members' well-being as well. So I think when I think of a great leader, I would think about someone who not just care about success of the organization or particular project, but like a long-term like sustainability of organizations and the people running it.
Thank you. That's really interesting. Would somebody else be willing to share some of the reasoning behind their inspiring leaders that they've chosen?
So Tang from Vietnam said Gandhi for his nonviolent tactics and his compassion towards all beings.
So a value that he held, a value of, yeah.
Oh, someone has their hand up.
Matashi, please go ahead.
Hi. I think for me, it is being able to convert your advocacy into tangible change with respect to policies and laws, and also being able to create a connection with a larger audience. Thank you.
So being able to create impact, so have values. I think, somebody was talking about Gandhi and having the right values and being inspiring with values, but then also be able to convert that into action that's tangible, and that we can see that some change has taken place in the whatever different social justice issues we are working for. Other inputs. I can't see the queue, but I see Darshan who's raised his hand. Do you want to go ahead, Darshan? You're on mute, Darshan. Darshan, you're still on mute. Oh, still on mute.
You should be able to. Oh.
Hello.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. On the similar notes, what others were pointing out, right, regarding tangible policies and effective outcome of anything you do. So I thought that the Wayne Shuang's recent Right to Rescue campaign, right, from Direct Action Everywhere, that was some challenge for them actually too, when they got prosecuted and they got charged. But eventually they turned that challenge into an opportunity and reached out to even more audience, and in the process also created so many advocates. So that is what I thought is a very interesting example to look at.
That's a really good point. So being able to really sort of see, to be able to identify an opportunity when it comes up, not just letting it go by, capitalize, to use that word, that opportunity for the benefit of animals in multiple ways, in not just sort of, the landmark case, but also in creating more advocates and the impact it has on movement building, and being able to really leverage again, and being very strategic about it. That's such a great example of strategy in action, so that's a really good one. Others, other inputs on what strategic leadership looks like? There are lots of really interesting suggestions in the chat box, so I encourage people to share those, please. Mohammed Bakar, requesting you to please go ahead. I see you raised your hand.
Yeah, hi, first of all, this is my first time attending this advocacy webinars. So yeah, I would say that a strategic leader is like a liquid, and the strategic leadership is like a liquid leadership, easily manipulate the idea and make easy for the people who are working with them.
Yeah. So really sort of like almost supportive, what I'm hearing is a supportive form of leadership, which really helps, really bring things to fruition, sort of like be able to support the work that we're doing and be able to bring things to fruition. I think, I mean, that's what I understood. That's a very good point. Any others who'd like to share some of the names, a little bit more about some of the names that you put in the chat? Really interesting perspectives, I mean, how different aspects of leadership resonate with each of us, and we find so many different aspects of leadership inspiring, and how they all add and and play into each other. Anyone else?
You could use the raise hand emoji if you'd like to speak.
Okay, so I'll move on, and please feel free to keep adding names to the chat. So the objective really with strategic thinking and strategic leadership is to be able to strategically set and plan towards what are winnable and high impact goals for animals, both winnability and high impact are two words that I want to draw everybody's attention to. So we want to make sure that our goals that we set are winnable and that they have a high impact. And then that we are able to set our goals in a way that they have high impact, that they're winnable, and that we're able to plan towards them so we can achieve them. Ultimately, that's the point of strategic thinking. That's what we really setting out to do when we talk about strategic thinking. And like I said earlier, this is not something that has to only be done once in 5 years or once in 3 years when we're doing our strategic plan. I mean, it's a mindset that we have. It's a continuous way of approaching the work that we do, that we're constantly thinking of our work in a strategic manner. The key considerations when you're thinking strategically, the first, and I'll go through these in detail, I'll also take you through 2 case studies for what strategic planning looks like. So the key considerations are what is it that we want to achieve? How are we going to get there? Who are the people involved, and who is the target of our, of our campaign, of our action? How will we evaluate it? What are the resources that we will need, and goal setting and timelines? So these are the 6 main considerations that we need to think about when we're doing strategic thinking. Is this visible? Because it's being blocked out on my, it is visible. Okay, excellent. So what do you want? First of all, the what. So what is, when we think about what, it is really thinking about what is the biggest issue that we face as that our organization, that animals in our whatever geography that we're working in face, and what is the most neglected issue, and if it is winnable. These are the 3 main considerations when we're thinking about what it is, and when we're setting the direction for our when we're setting the goal. So the biggest issue often, I mean, it could be a farmed animal, it could be it could be poultry, for example, in your area, in your geographical area. It could be pigs elsewhere. It could be it could even be dogs. If human dog conflict is a big issue. So scale is of course one issue, but biggest is not necessarily just scale. Of course, scale is super important when we're thinking of it from an impact standpoint, but biggest also in terms of visibility. Sometimes, like, what's the greatest, in terms of thinking about what's the greatest impact we will have. And I'll give you an example for this. When we were working on preventing dolphinaria from being set up in India, the scale of the problem was not that significant, because we're only talking about, a very small number of dolphins that would actually, and cetaceans that would have actually been in captivity in dolphinaria. But the visibility of the problem was so significant. The impact of the problem would have been so significant. So it becomes a big issue in not just the sense of scale, but also the impact that a certain kind of a narrative has, and dolphinaria would have set up, would have opened a whole new can of worms in keeping cetaceans captive for entertainment in India. So So what is the biggest issue, and is it really neglected? Are there other organizations working on it? Is it of interest to multiple people? So how neglected is this issue? I mean, think of a really big issue that nobody's working on. I mean, that's something definitely that then we want to look at. And is it winnable? I mean, there are so many issues. For example, antimicrobial resistance, especially in India, is a very big issue. It is neglected in the sense that, I mean, some organizations are working on it, but it's not something that, I would say every animal organization is working on it. But is it really winnable? When we look at the policy around it for the last, say 5 years, there has not been any significant change or any significant indication of change. So I think one of the things, one of the considerations in when we're thinking about what it is that we want to do is to really think about, is this really, am I going to win this? Because we can put in all the resources that we have, all the time and effort and years of campaigning in a really big issue, in a really important issue, in a very neglected issue. But if it's not winnable, then those resources ultimately would not benefit animals in a impactful way. So these are the three things that we definitely need to be thinking about when we're thinking about what do we want. The second consideration is how do we want to do something. Taking the example of Dolphinaria, for example, in India, how can we do this? What has worked elsewhere? What have been the successful examples of campaigns for banning say Dolphinaria from being set up, or banning or preventing or reducing the suffering of cetaceans in captivity? What has really worked elsewhere? What has not worked elsewhere? And what is the path of least resistance? What is the low-hanging fruit? How can we make this easier to achieve? And what data do we have to support that we will be successful? I mean, we may think that this is something that is impactful. We may think that this is a good path to take, but really, is there data that we have that supports that that theory? I think that's also really important. And what's the energy around this issue? Will other people join us? Some issues can be some issues can be of a kind that don't really excite people, don't really so for example, like working on a issue like dolphins is something that environmentalists and people from the conservation space would be interested in getting involved in, versus something like maybe even fish, which is not or aquaculture, which is not an issue that that unless, I mean, of course, now with intersectional work, we are finding ways to open those dialogues and conversations with other sectors also around fish. But traditionally, some issues are much harder for people to really engage in. So to think about like what is the energy around this issue really helps us. All these questions really help us think about how are we really going to achieve a specific direction goal that we may set for ourselves. The third thing to think about is who, right? So who are our stakeholders? And those are two kinds. One is who are going to help us in achieving what we want. So these could be partnerships, these could be other civil society organizations, these could be alliances we build, these could be volunteers, funders. Funders play such a big role in enabling a lot of the work that we do. And also who has the power to give us what we want. So who's really our target? So if we are talking about, say, Dolphinaria, who can help, who will ultimately be the target for, if our campaign is to ban Dolphinaria in India, who has the power to give us that? It's the ministry, it's the government. So then we identify the ministry who has the power to give us that, we identify the target, and then we identify actually within the target who are the specific individuals that are the decision makers and power holders. So the stakeholder analysis is super important, both in terms of who will be helping us and also who the target is for any kind of a campaign that we undertake. And then, of course, evaluation and resources, which have to be a part of our strategic thinking. So evaluation, again, I think we often think is something that we need to think about once we have finished a campaign, but it's not so, because we have to be thinking about how will we know we are successful? We need to be asking ourselves that question while we are designing our campaign, while we are designing the work that we want to undertake, because only then can we really fine tune the specific goal that we want to set, the specific direction that we want to set. And there are very fine nuanced changes that come in. And it also really helps us make sure that we stay focused. You know, when we know that this is what success looks like, we stop taking, pardon me, we stop taking any unnecessary actions that deviate us from that. Lots of times in animal advocacy or any form of campaigning, what can happen is that, you know, there can be a lot of mission drift. We can start working in one direction, and then we sort of find that we are piling on lots of actions then that don't really take us to where we want to go, or that we find that we are drifting away from what we had set out to do. And making sure that we have a clear metric, we have clear metrics for how we're going to evaluate ourselves, how do we know we're successful, is really important in keeping us on track, in making sure that it is continuous, that while we are doing the work that we are doing, we are continuously able to look at whether we are getting to success, whether we're already successful. And also in terms of resources, what is it that's going to take to be able to do this work? So, you know, of course, funding is one, but also other forms of resources. You know, do we need partnerships? Do we need, you know, do we need research expertise? Do we need, you know, what sort of resources that we need? And resources can be so much more than just funds. You know, do we need a network within the media? You know, if it's a public facing campaign, to be able to get things out to the media and so on and so forth, you know, and then how do we get those resources? And these are all really all these sort of different considerations for strategic thinking interplay, because the second we say, for example, in our, you know, in one of the other sections that, okay, we need a public facing campaign, but then do we have the resources? Do we have a media network that can do that? And then if we don't have a media network and we don't know how to get the media network, that means something in our what or how needs to change. You know, so these are really interlinked, and they really need to be thought about together in one go. And we don't think about resources and evaluation, you know, at a later separate stage. You know, they have to be integrated in our campaign planning. And then goal setting. You know, I mean, this is just plain planning, right? Our goals need to be smart, and we need to do backward planning and timeline. So if in month 12 our target is that we need to treat 70 dogs on, you know, I'm presuming most people in Asia, there's a lot of on-site first aid rescue work that happens. And if there's, you know, if one of the targets is that we treat 70 dogs every month on site, then, you know, month one, we need to start recruiting volunteers. And it's really important to break that down and really to make sure that there are sort of like achievable, smart goals that we have regularly, so that we know that if we've done our work in month one, we are going to get to month 12. So that's sort of really important in terms of implementing the thinking that we're able to do strategically. So being strategic, we know where we're going. We take all the necessary actions and no unnecessary ones. That's really important in keeping focused. You know, like being focused is so important. You know, we can think strategically, like I said, once in a year, and then it could just be a document sitting somewhere, you know, in our laptops. And then we also understand how communications, volunteers, fundraising, etc., is also a part of our goals. You know, so like I said, resources and evaluation is not a separate aspect of strategic thinking. It has to be interlinked, and we get more bang for our buck. We are really able to make sure that we are able to run high impact campaigns. So that's the theory part of it. I wanted to actually go through some case studies, because I think that would be useful. Is all of this, is this whole case study visible? Are there sections that are blocked out, which is visible? Okay, I can see that one. Excellent. So this is a case study for Living Free, for, you know, when we were setting up India's largest vegan advocacy, what was then India's largest vegan advocacy network. And this eventually spanned across 70 cities in India. And we started this work in 2012, so just setting the context for how this came about. We started this in 2012, and back then there was, you know, limited to none grassroots vegan advocacy that was taking place in India. Almost 99% of animal advocates focused on spay-neuter work, on rescuing dogs and other animals on the street. And we found this huge gap in people talking about farmed animals, people talking about vegan advocacy, and any meaningful vegan advocacy taking place in India. The only vegan advocacy that was taking place was through some of the media related demonstrations that some national organizations were doing, the PR demos, but not sort of like the usual grassroots advocacy that one sees, leafleting and tabling and all those things to engage with the public on veganism and farmed animal issues. So we in 2012 we started this campaign, which ran, I think, about over six or 7 years. And our goal, we had two goals, and which is why I wanted to share this case study here. It's a great example when we had two what's, right? So one was that we wanted to create vegan advocacy leaders in India, and the other was that we actually also wanted to undertake vegan advocacy. So, for example, one of our targets every year was to train, say, 200,000 to educate 200,000 people, just general public, through physical outreach, whether it is through a talk or through a leaflet, or to some other means about veganism. So we had both goals that we parallelly wanted to pursue. And and we saw that this was a really neglected issue in India. It was a very big issue. Farmed animals, there was practically no consumer-related work that was happening for farmed animals in India, so that it was a huge gap in the movement. There was very few. There was only one other organization actually at the time doing any consumer-related work for farmed animals, and we felt it was winnable because one of the considerations when we looked at it, we saw that a lot of pardon me, a lot of focus in India was on spay-neuter work. There were lots of activists who were engaged with animal advocacy, maybe not farmed animal advocacy, but some form of advocacy. So we sort of felt like there was, because there are people who are willing to do work for animals, that there may be an interest to do work for, to expand their, interest and area of activism to include farmed animals also. And then other considerations we had were also that we wanted to cover the geography. India is a massive country, so to make sure that there was good coverage, and that also we realized that we had to train people, eventually, we didn't start with training immediately, but we knew over time training of activists is something that's going to become quite critical. And so that's what, that's how we described our what. With the how, pardon me, I had a sip of water. With the how, we really looked at what has worked elsewhere. So we looked at what has been working in other parts of the world. So we looked at grassroots activism in the EU, grassroots activism in the US. We had lots of consultations with other international groups in other parts of the world to see what have been their experiences on both movement building and vegan advocacy. We did a pilot study actually in one of the cities in India to measure the impact of different kinds of resources that we could use to do vegan advocacy. So we really wanted to make sure that we had that data available with us to know that the kind of resources and the kind of advocacy that we were going to do would be successful. We had two phases around this. So one was identifying leaders, and this is across, this is over, say, a period of 6 years. We started with 6 cities. So in year one, we trained leaders in 6 cities, and over a period of several years, we got to 70 cities, and that's how we trained leaders in so many different places. And then phase 2 was also creating resources and the geographical spread for activists across the country. We looked at who, so identifying and, engaging different stakeholders. So we reached out to individual activists, and we knew individual activists will be our greatest allies in this, because individual activists often globally tend to be the ones who are, individual grassroots activists are the ones who tend to be involved in farmed animal related street activism. We also did reach out to grassroots NGOs, but this was something that failed for us. It didn't work out for us because grassroots NGOs were typically very focused on their existing objectives and missions and so on and so forth, which was typically rescue related work. So that did not work for us. And international organizations, of course, because we were starting something very new in India and we were looking internationally at what was happening, we continued to stay in touch, and we continued to build strong partnerships with international organizations. And it also helped us attract some funding. So that was also a really good way to be able to attract funding, to be able to support some of this work in a context specific way for what worked in India with, with Indian activists and other movement capacity building in intermediaries. So what we also did was we realized that while we were trying to encourage and do movement building for farmed animal activism, one stakeholder was just general civil society intermediaries, civil society capacity building. There are lots of organizations that support capacity building, the support training of grassroots activists across multiple issues. So we also reached out to those organizations so we could draw on their expertise, we could draw on their training programs and help support some of our activists also. So they also became an important stakeholder that also helped build a bridge with them, because their exposure to farmed animal issues also increased as a result of our collaboration. In terms of evaluation, again, because we had two different WOTs, one was to create vegan advocacy leaders. So that is, we measure that just with how many activists we have, but also what kind of vegan advocacy were they undertaking? Because we were interested in also making sure that people, general public, our target audience, which was, we wanted people to take pledges to go vegan. We wanted to also make sure that the quality of the activism, the frequency and the spread of activism that we are training people to undertake is up to the mark. So we which is why it really helped us. It really helped us to map out our what, because then when we were thinking of our evaluation, we were able to include multiple evaluation criteria. And then in terms of resources, making, we needed materials, we needed kits. We wanted to make it really easy for activists to be able to undertake this work. The partnerships we had with our international organizations were really important. And of course, we needed funds for campaign coordinators, materials, travel, and the local outreach and the costs for local grassroots activists. And the goal setting, just a very basic example here. But the goal setting is, of course, a much more complicated, larger, plan that would be created. But say, for example, if in month 12, our goal is to train 1,000 activists across 70 cities, we would start with identify, say, 10 activists in 10 cities, and then slowly work our way up. And what this really helped us do, for this particular case study, first of all, we were, by following this process, we were really able to articulate, and I think lots of these things we already know when we're thinking of our campaigns, somewhere in the back of our minds, we perhaps already, we are aware of some of these things, but really having the discipline to think through this strategically, to put this down, we understand, we are able to articulate that there are two different kinds of things that we were setting out to achieve. They were interlinked, but there were there was a dual, almost dual goals that we had, and that we were able to take actions. We were able to take actions that supported both, and that this tension between outreach and movement building always kept coming up in the years that we ran this campaign. This tension was always there, and we were always aware of this tension, and we were always able to balance this tension because for competing resources by using this sort of a process. And then we were also, I think if in year one, somebody would have said to us that, our goal is to go from 0 to 70 cities, that would have been such a daunting challenge. It seems like, there's no grassroots vegan activism happening right now. And from here, we've got to get to 70 cities and 1,000 activists who are trained and, running groups and so on. But by breaking this down and by using a strategic process, we were able to systematically and realistically improve both the quality and the breadth of the network that we set up for vegan advocacy in India. So that's one of the case studies, and I'll take you through one more before we do an exercise where you can then write your plan. So this one's about intersectionality. So it's bringing intersectional food system reform in India. This is the work that we are undertaking at Samayu. In this, when we sat down to think about the what, the issue and the neglected issue, we were really thinking about how the animal movement is, it needs more mainstreaming. When we talk about animal issues, we talk about animal issues often in the context of just animals, that, oh, well, we want either, whether somebody believes in welfare reform or, or abolition and veganism, we would look at it either from the point of view that either we want the dairy cows' conditions to be improved, or we want people to stop consuming dairy, and that's the sort of universe within which we look. We look at, animal advocacy, but we sort of felt like that wasn't big enough. That wasn't enough, especially when we live in a world now which is just recovering, which is recovered from a pandemic. There are massive public health challenges. There's massive climate change challenges. So we felt that the animal narrative needs to be contextualized in the world in which we live in. Like the animal narrative often seems so in a well. We are simply just talking about animals themselves, as if animals are not connected to farmers or food. And animals are being consumed for food, and that's something that we're trying to change. But we can't change that by saying that it doesn't happen. Animals are consumed for food, and we have to engage with that. We have to look at that narrative. We have to look at that narrative and really understand the different actors within that narrative if we want to bring a change in that food system and move to a more plant-forward food system, which is what we're trying to do at Samayu. So what we really wanted to do was to mainstream, and that was like the big neglected space that we see, that that animals are not being mainstreamed in the wider global context. Whenever it's international policy, whether it's national policy, any, sort of conversations on climate change and so on, animals are never at the table, so to speak, as a stakeholder. We never talk about the importance of animal interests. And we also felt like we needed to build alliances with other movements to strengthen the animal movement. And the animal movement is so small. And if we really want to create an impact, if we really want to even be seen, we need so many more. We need so many more advocates. We need so many more allies. So we felt like we needed a bigger tent. We need the people who are already concerned about the state of our planet, because it's also interconnected. We needed this bigger tent. So we wanted to build those alliances. That's what we felt was also a very neglected area of work, a more intersectional approach to animal advocacy. And then we looked at what has really worked elsewhere. We looked at organizations that are doing similar work and applying a similar larger intersection lens within the animal advocacy, farmed animal movement internationally. We also looked at coalitions and other intersectional work for non-animal social justice issues. So we looked at that. And we realized two things. One was that we had to develop an intersectional coalition, that if we are talking about intersectional action, then we will need representatives from multiple issues to really come together. And we'll have to of course, build processes and so on and so forth for those dialogues to take place. But we needed a coalition that would, respond to some of these challenges, and that there had to be tangible intersectional action. Again, this was a huge learning for us through this process, that, that because intersectionality is such an abstract concept, we talk about intersectionality, but it's very hard for most people to really, when you say end animal exploitation, it's simply, stop eating animals, like we go vegan or welfare reform, if that may be the case. But when we talk about intersectionality is so much more harder for anybody to really visualize what does intersectionality look like in action, in change. If we have to say we want to transform something, what does intersectional action look like? And that's something that we also really identified as a gap when we did this, when we went through this process. And we decided that one of the things that we wanted to include in our how was tangible intersectional action. So the next 4 points after that, the policy reform, research, training campaigns, those are examples. It's just there's a formatting. I want to there's a formatting problem there, but those are 4 examples of what tangible intersectional action looks like for us. And that's something that was super critical, that we needed, policy or research on training and or training and campaigns that made intersectionality more tangible. The who was really important. This is also why I wanted to share this case study, because it has multiple stakeholders. So one of the challenges, and I think we could have not done this if we did not have, we would not have gone through this process. But when we started started the thinking around intersectional action, it was so complicated. Like when you talk about, we picked food systems as the intersectional issue we wanted to work on because of the scale. But it was so complicated because you're talking about nutrition, and you're talking about livelihoods, and you're talking about food, and you're talking about public health and pollution, and climate change and environmental degradation and biodiversity. I mean, there was like, it was massive. The number of issues that are interconnected to animal exploitation and animal agriculture is humongous. So how do we really simplify that complex world, and that issue mapping was so valuable for us, by doing the stakeholder analysis, by going through this process and saying, okay, well, there's these 4 main areas. So for us, of course, animal agriculture, and then climate change, public health, and farm livelihoods, and then really being able to focus on these areas and to be able to map that these are the main issues and stakeholders that we want to engage with. And of course, like other kinds of stakeholders, so civil society, of course, grassroots themselves, and NGOs, and thought leadership. Again, this was sort of like a very, this was linked to our strategic thinking in, how do we really want to bring about transformation? And that we learned from our work that we had done for setting up the plant-based advocacy network, Living Free, that that the NGOs weren't very responsive. The NGOs weren't very responsive in accepting different kinds of activism, because they were already busy with their own kind of work. So when we were setting this up, we realized that the larger NGOs, the ones who already have their existing areas of work and larger budgets and so on and so forth, are unlikely to be participating in this, which is why the focus strategically has been always put on grassroots, because that's where we've had success in the past. And that's what, that's what's really helpful when we go through this process, to be able to identify what's worked well for us in the past, and then to be able to map it in here. Another thing that was really interesting was when we did this was that we found that animal NGOs actually had a very limited role. As an intersectional organization, we realized that because our to mainstream interest of animals was to go out. We realized that we had to engage more with other kinds of organizations instead of animal organizations, whereas previously when we were working on some issues, our networks were mainly to do with animal organizations. But then as soon as we actually articulated what it is that we were trying to do, we realized that we didn't have to, we didn't have to the education, for example, is not needed for the animal NGOs. We have to be looking outwards more, and again, it really helps to, that's what strategic thinking is all about. It's about, being able to think with that clarity. What is it really that we want to do? And then, in a focused way, being able to do it. For our evaluation, of course, the representation of issues in the coalition. So in our coalition, how many representatives do we have from the public health space, from the environmental space, from the farmer space, to make sure that it is it has a wide representation across multiple sectors, and engagement of partners in action. So if we are taking any kind of a tangible action for intersectionality, how engaged really are our partner organizations? And again, that's super, it's really important to be thinking of that evaluation while we are doing our work, because it has such a significant impact on how we do it. And also the effectiveness and quality of actions. For example, if you're undertaking research, what's the quality of that research? If you're undertaking policy reform, what's the effectiveness of that? So again, that's a really, really important evaluation metric for us. And resources, of course, funding for all the different all the different expert staff and travel and so on and so forth, but also partnerships. Partnerships is a very important resource for us, especially as a network organization, as a coalition organization. Those partnerships were really important. And within partner, I actually wanted to add here things like research expertise, which is also another resource we realized we needed. And developing, of course, getting getting experts in-house working with us, of course, was one very important way to fill that gap, but also to make sure that there were the right partnerships in place with research institutes, with other sort of partners that we needed. And finally, goal setting, again, and just an example here. So if, for example, one of our campaigns is farm transformations for aquaculture farmers. So to identify diversification to plant forward opportunities for aquaculture farmers. So that's what we want to achieve in month 12. In month one, we start with developing partnerships with research institutes and farmer groups. Month 2, we do literature review, monthly field visit, and so on and so forth. And that can be developed to make sure that we reach where we want to get to in month 12. So those are the 2 case studies. And what I thought we could do, before that, there's this one slide I wanted to share, on how this helped us. I've talked a little bit about this already. So doing our strategic thinking and planning with this process, first of all, like I said earlier, it really helped us unpack the multiple stakeholders in this intersectional work. We were able to simplify a very complex world. And we were also able to develop very targeted persuasion strategies for each group, So as an intersectional organization, that becomes so critical to have the right materials, right research, right data, right language to be able to build bridges with different kinds of groups, and then to be able to develop that. And also the fact that, that we need tangible action for intersectional work, and I think that was again something that was really valuable for us. And also if it was winnable, all the tangible actions in intersectionality can we really achieve those? Will we really, will we really be able to transform for the better? And is that really realistic? So that's how it was like. I think, like I said earlier, it becomes really valuable because we are already perhaps aware of lots of these considerations when we're thinking of our campaigns and when we're thinking of our work, but to actually have the discipline to sit down and go through it and spend the time that's needed and to articulate it and to look at all these, really take a step back from our day-to-day work. That's really what, so we're not just being a doer, we're not just sort of executing and busy with that. We're really able to take a step back and say, let me actually sit down and think about all these different considerations for my campaign and develop some of the more nuanced, strategies and tactics that will help me achieve my goal. So with that, what I suggest is, because it'd be good to have a discussion on this, I don't know if we can break up in breakout rooms.